Hi there, I'm the Anime Twerp. So I was able to see 9 love stories, and it's kind of one of those, it does exactly what it says on the tin sort of anime, in that it's exactly what it is. Literally 9 love stories, eachly roughly 9 to 10 minutes in length and unrelated to each other. And yeah, it was pretty interesting to see on many levels. Are they good examples of love stories? Well, I'd need to get into that more fully in a bit. Certainly, I think the film as a whole makes you think about how love stories work, or not, as the case may be. So this is an OVA film release from 1992, although several sources also say 1991 or 1993. It's based on a series of short manga by Kaiji Kawaguchi. He's not very well known in the West, but several of his manga have been adapted into anime, and several of those anime have been released in English to reasonable success. The most famous of them are Silent Service, A Spirit in the Sun, and Zippang, and each are known for being really political stories with a particular focus on Japan's place in the world stage. Of course, 9 Love Stories isn't very political at all, but Kawaguchi's art style is his calling card, really. His approach very much links all his works together. The character designs are very much anime, with the large eyes and all that we've come to know and love about anime, but they have a very Japanese feel to them and a very real feel to them. I mean, I won't go all out and say they're like real people, but the designs feel more grounded in reality. Like Kawaguchi took photographs of people he sees on commute and adapted them into a grounded anime aesthetic. It's quite nice to see. It reminds me very much of the artwork and character designs of people like Katsuhiro Otomo and Satoshi Kon. And like them, he draws a variety of characters with different looks and body types, which does make you think you're seeing a full variety of people, not just a list of stock characters. Really, grounded is the best way to describe it, as even in movement, the animation is pretty subdued and realistic, with an almost muted color palette for the most of the stories. Of course, there is a limited budget at work here, but some of the stories have animation that is really quite nice and fluid, and that it is devoted largely to characters and their interactions, and not to like epic, like bombastic action scenes. It's really nice to see. So it's a film of 9 unrelated love stories about adult men and women, although 2 of the stories feature lengthy flashbacks to high school romances. Is that all there is to it? It kind of is, to be honest, but that's still pretty interesting even on its own. Even today, it is still rare for anime to focus on anyone older than like college or university age, so focusing on adult men and women who have to find and maintain romantic relationships all the while managing their jobs and careers and other commitments at home and at work is really actually quite nice to see. Of course, the real unique selling point of this OVA film is its soundtrack. Each story features a well-known song which acts as the story's theme, both musically and what the story is about as in thematically, as well as the story's title. The anime is most famous for having the Beatles' I Wanna Hold Your Hand in its opening story. The film has a mix of famous songs from Japan and the West, and some of the English songs include Let's Spend the Night Together from the Rolling Stones, I Can't Stop Loving You from Don Gibson, Those Were the Days by Michael Himmelstein, not the Gene Raskin song made famous by Mary Hopkin, it's not that one, and White Christmas by Irving Berlin. Aside from the ending instrumental, which is a recapitulation of the entire soundtrack as a piano piece, this is the film's entire soundtrack. For the most part, each song is used as the ending theme to each individual story, except for Let's Spend the Night Together, which plays during a car chase scene, and I Wanna Hold Your Hand, which actually figures into the plot of the first story. So after explaining all that, I imagine everyone thinks this must be a great little gem, undeservedly undiscovered in the West, and in a way I'm inclined to agree, but not by much, if I'm to be honest. Again, the anime is unique and features a lot of things that are really nice to see. If for no reason, then you just don't see them in modern romance anime. But that's honestly it, really. The film as a whole doesn't have that much going for it and doesn't leave that much of an impression, to be honest. I think the big problem here is the film's format. The short stories just feel too short for the stories they want to tell. Now, don't get me wrong, I really like short films, and the romances here are hardly so complex that they each require like a 3-hour running time to make it an epic Oscar contender, that sort of thing. The problem for me is that the stories rely so much on us believing in the romance, of understanding the main couple, or just the protagonist on their own. And that's for each of the stories. We have to believe in their romance, and I just couldn't. These stories really need a long running time in order for us to fully invest and care in their relationship. I'm not saying that it has to be much of a running time, but certainly around the half-hour to 45-minute mark. In all honesty, there was only one story where I thought I would like to see a feature-length film made out of it. As things stand now, most of the stories, couples and their relationships leave you thinking at best, oh, that was okay. At worst, that was frustrating, I wanted more. Or, for the most part, with no real impression at all. It doesn't quite get to the level of where you think, oh, stuff just happens, what was the point? But it's not that far off. Really, there are only 2 short stories that do work and feel like complete stories, and that is because they are almost entirely situational. Plot-wise, these 2 have complete stories with a beginning, middle, and an end, with appropriate setups and payoffs. They feel like complete films. The stories here are really about the situation at hand and how the characters react to it, instead of being about the relationship that they are in. And really, that makes them more enjoyable as short films. The other stories feel less like short films and more like bits and pieces of scenes from longer films, and just don't feel satisfying. As an aside, I will say one of the directors went on shortly after to direct another romance anime, Ocean Waves, for Studio Ghibli, and you can see how beneficial through that a longer running time is to this sort of romance story, the one where you need to invest in the relationship and care about the relationship, as opposed to experiencing what the characters are experiencing of the situation, if you know what I mean. Something that short films can do to spice up themselves is to have experimental or at least different stylistic choices, and sadly this is something Nine Love Stories doesn't do either. While there are some stories that have some fun with this style, like having split screens, photo montages, some very limited live action segments and things like that. One story has photocopied backgrounds of the outdoor locations, which I thought was interesting. For the most part, the style is very subdued and muted, which again fits in with the stories that they want to tell, but it doesn't really stand out. It does come across as just plain. Some stylistic decisions don't make much sense, like during the end credits there are some live action photo montages of different locations in Tokyo, and like the landscape views and such, which to be honest makes it seem like the film was more about Tokyo than the romances or the characters, and it really wasn't in the end. That all being said, overall I do think Nine Love Stories is worth seeing. Despite the soundtrack, it is actually a really quiet little film about adult men and women and their romantic lives, and that is quite nice to see. The art and designs are nice, the voice acting is good and features quite a bevy of talent from the time, and the recognizable soundtrack does give it a little bit of uniqueness, and all that makes it worth seeing. You won't be blown away by it, and certainly the actual stories probably won't do much for you, but overall it is worth seeing, I would say. I would say it is worth seeing just because of how different it is to a lot of anime, not just like romantic anime, but other types as well. Given its part uniqueness and part plainness, could 9 Love Stories be given an English language release? Well, yes, I think it can. That it doesn't completely fit in with the anime produced and released today might be something that makes distributors pass it over, and it might have been one that made distributors pass it over back then as well, but I think it could be given a reasonable English language release. The tricky part comes from what is undoubtedly the anime's unique selling point, and that's its soundtrack. That it features famous songs from the likes of the Beatles and the Rolling Stones is likely to drive the licensing price up to an unimaginable level. There could even be problems relicensing the soundtrack for the release in different markets and different formats, meaning that not only would the anime distributors have to be paid, but also a licensor would have to negotiate with the separate record companies and copyright holders of the original songs. While you may think this is an odd problem to bring up, and maybe even a little bit far-fetched, this is actually pretty common for any piece of media that uses famous recordings. Have you ever watched a TV series and then bought it on home video and found that the soundtrack has been replaced? Or is there a film that you remember with a famous soundtrack that took ages and ages to get onto video? Well, that's because the original contracts for the soundtrack were likely only for the TV broadcast or the cinema release, and didn't take things like home video releases into consideration. Music licensing is such a complicated thing that it trips up many a film and TV company, especially distributors. This has even happened in the world of licensed anime releases. It is that common. So I can't imagine many distributors wanting to take too much of a chance on 9 Love Stories for this reason alone. Maybe if a big enough company took it on, or else if the original Japanese companies, Studio Deen and Toho, decided to commission an English language release themselves, there is a chance. But sadly, given how different it is to anime produced and released today, even within the romance genre, it's unlikely, which is pretty sad. And yeah, I think that's about all I wanted to say. Thank you very much for listening, and I hope to see you again soon.